After initially making waves on the internet a couple years back when Shank Mods made his homemade Gamecube Joy Cons, we've begun to see more and more companies roll out their own options of these that they probably started working on basically after that video came out. Previously, I reviewed an option from Nixie called the Nixie Wizard. Now, while the name is different, I think it is important to point out that this is actually made by the same company responsible for the Binbok Joy Cons, which have enjoyed a relatively high level of success compared to a lot of unlicensed third-party options that have been made, primarily because they are a large-style Joy-Con with a pretty nice number of features that can still be used wirelessly as opposed to some of the licensed options like the Hori Split Pad Pro. And so, given how many people have been fans of the Binbok Joy Cons, myself included, I've been really curious to see how their take on a Gamecube Joy Con will work out. And there's some stuff I like, and other stuff I'm definitely a little more mixed on. Before I dive in, one thing I want to shout out real quick. Like I mentioned, I did previously review another set of Gamecube Joy Cons that were from Nixie, and I am planning on doing a direct head-to-head comparison between this one and that one in the future, so if that is a video you want to make sure to check out, subscribe so you don't miss out on it. Now, how does this compare to the original Gamecube controller, and how does it live up as a Switch Joy-Con option? I want to start by really focusing on where it deviates from the official Gamecube controller and what it has in common. As far as in common goes, obviously, color-wise and general shape-wise, this draws some inspiration from the Wavebird controller while using the GameCube Indigo Purple, at least on the Joy-Cons themselves, not the bridge for whatever reason. This is very clearly the same general layout as a GameCube-style controller, including the way the AVXY is set up. There are a couple key differences, though, also in how this is handled. The D-pad, for instance, has been made larger, which is a pretty common change in a lot of modern takes on the GameCube controller. If there was ever any kind of one main complaint with the original, it's how tiny the D-pad was, so that is a welcome change to see, although I do have some thoughts on how it actually feels. Of course, being an updated controller for the Switch, there are a pair of LNRs in the front, along with having the ZL-ZR. This is one major area where it is also a large change, because compared to the Z button on the official GameCube controller, these ones don't require that kind of lever action push where you always have to favor the edge. You can do it all the way to the base here and it still presses down. And instead of having the kind of half analog with the final click press that the GameCube controllers have, this is just a traditional button that has a light trigger kind of lever shape to it. Now, while this is visually mimicking the GameCube controller and where you're actually resting your hands remains roughly the same size and shape, one thing that does stand out to me a lot is how thin the profile in this controller is when you actually look at the center bridge. The reason being for the fact that they opted for the thickness of Joy-Cons for the bridge itself and had that match on the main controller body. So you have this GameCube style controller thickness on the outsides, but it then thins out a lot in the middle section, which again doesn't really directly impact how it feels to hold, but definitely makes it look a bit different from what you're used to. Now, special feature-wise, there's a lot of stuff that has been added to this controller, a lot of stuff that you tend to see in a lot of third-party controller options. We, of course, have a pair of remappable back buttons because these are Joy-Con style ones. You can only remap the button to something on the same side. So, for instance, if you wanted to map X to something, you could only do it to this button on the back of the right-hand Joy-Con. Left-hand Joy-Con, you're basically just remapping one of the shoulder buttons or the minus or capture button. Of course, another third-party staple that's made its way on here is a turbo button. It also, one of the things that's mentioned but not really clarified anywhere as far as I can tell is that this controller does also have adjustable rumble. It's not listed or advertised on the website as far as I can tell. The only reason I know it's a thing is because it was listed on the box for it, which doesn't even give instructions on how to do it. It just says you can adjust it. After messing around with it a little while, I did figure out that it's a fairly common solution where you hold the remapping button and then use the D-pad to adjust up and down the rumble intensity. I will say, messing with it, I really didn't notice all that much of a difference. Across the board, while there is maybe a little bit more vibration on the high end and low vibration if you bring it all the way down, in my experience, even at its highest setting, the rumble is still relatively on the low end and not that much noticeably different compared to having it at the bottom. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this does come with a bridge that, for whatever reason, they opted for keeping it a black design instead of doing a indigo to match the Joy-Cons. One of the benefits of this bridge is that when it comes to third-party style Joy-Cons, oftentimes a lot of third-party controllers of this style have their own direct USB-C ports for charging. With this bridge, you are able to charge both controllers simultaneously, which is handy. One other question that I tend to get a lot with third-party controllers like this is whether or not it can turn on the Switch, and the answer is yes. It does, however, require that you specifically use the home and capture buttons for turning the Joy-Cons on, which will then sync to the Switch and then turn it on. Something that's really funny about this is that they definitely used something to make the Switch think that it's just a regular Joy-Con that's being synced to it. It shows up as a pair of Joy-Cons Joy-Cons in the game's interface. And not only that, but they did go to the trouble of having it be represented with the purple Joy-Con color in particular, so it does match that indigo styling. One additional physical feature of this controller that's a little interesting is that it does have swappable stick heads. Basically, the way they worked it out is that for both the left and right hand side, there are 3 different sticks to choose from that do maintain the gray and yellow color schemes. Both sides have a option that is similar to the traditional left-hand side of the GameCube controller, where it has that little lining right here, another style that is more like the C-stick, where it's just a little nub, and there's a third option available for both that is a more traditional stick head that just has a flattened top, and that's it. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not sure if there's ever really a time that I would want to use the nub head on the gray option, but it is cool that you do get some additional choices. In particular, if you don't like having the C-stick style nub, if you're using this for a game that, for instance, needs more refined camera controls, it is nice that you're able to remove that design and replace it with a more traditional stick head if you wish. Now, as far as how the actual feeling for buttons and sticks and use and everything goes, while this certainly looks like a GameCube controller, a lot of the actual feeling and feedback is definitely different. The ABXY is considerably stiffer, something that happens on a lot of third-party controller options out there. You can just really feel how much it's pressing against you when you first press down, and then once you get to the bottom, it does feel like it just wants to stick a little bit. It never gets completely stuck or down there, and I am able to do rapid presses fairly well, but there's just a feeling of how it's not immediately bouncing back up that does bother me a little bit for rapid presses. The D-pad feels fine and registers correctly. The left and right sticks definitely have a much looser feeling to them compared to official GameCube controllers, which for me personally is definitely a bit of a downside. I always like having a bit of stick tension where you have a satisfying snapback, as well as just feeling the tension of the stick when you're moving it around. And these ones are definitely much more loose by comparison. And again, I kind of already covered this, but the shoulders are absolutely different as well. When it comes to features that are present in both this and traditional Joy-Cons, again, it does have rumble, though it feels a little bit on the weak side. Can turn the system on. It does not have an NFC reader, so you're not going to be scanning Amiibo with it. But it does thankfully have motion controls, which feel pretty tight on it. So if you enjoy using that style of aiming for games like Tears of the Kingdom or Splatoon, this is going to support that. One other note, as far as the general feeling of the controller goes, as is common with a lot of third-party options like this, it does also definitely favor being on the light side. The Joy-Cons do feel particularly hollow, and when compared to using, say, a Pro controller, there's definitely a noticeable difference in heft. Then, of course, there is the price point of this controller, which this one is targeting to be slightly cheaper than, but still basically up in the same territory as official Pro controller options at $65, where it is only listed on their own website, so you do have to order directly from them, not through a major retailer. Overall, I'd say my feelings on this controller is that it is fine. I do think the asking price is a little aggressively high for what you're getting, even compared to their own previously released controllers, the Binboks. You know, those offered a lot of solid functions and felt pretty good, whereas this one is asking you for basically Pro controller pricing at $65 with buttons and sticks that just don't feel quite as good. There are some nice features to list out, like the swappable stick heads, the remappable back button, and maintaining motion controls is a really nice plus, but it just doesn't feel like it's really adding up to the asking price. That said, if you have your heart set on the idea of getting some Joy-Cons that are shaped like a GameCube-style controller, this is now one of the only 2 major options that I'm aware of that are out on the market. Again, I am planning on doing a more in-depth comparison between this and the Nixie Wizard, so if you want to see those full thoughts, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. If you are interested in grabbing these ones, I do have a link posted down below in the description. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know, and I'll see you guys later.